Hey everybody, it's Glenn, back in this video with more Action Figure Evolution featuring Wolverine, a character so huge that his legacy in action figure form had to be split into 4 parts. If you missed any of the previous parts, click a video to catch up, then join me back here. In the previous part we covered the Toy Biz era of Marvel Legends. Well, that and over a decade of making Marvel action figures came to an end for Toy Biz in 2006. When toy company giant Hasbro entered into a 5-year licensing agreement with Marvel to make Marvel action figures. That agreement didn't mean that Hasbro had to carry on in the footsteps of Toy Biz, but as an indication of the popularity of Marvel Legends, they lived on with Hasbro. And our first Marvel Legends Wolverine under the banner of Hasbro came in the following year with 2007's Marvel Legends Blob Series Ultimate Wolverine. Launched in the year 2000, the Ultimate Universe is separate from the main Marvel Universe and was Marvel Comics' attempt to strip away 40 years of continuity that might alienate new readers. As part of the Ultimate Universe's reimagining of Wolverine, gone was his stocky stature from regular Marvel continuity, most likely because Ultimate Comics were more trying to capitalize on fans whose first experience of Wolverine was the 6'2" Hugh Jackman playing him, and he stands a foot taller than Wolverine is traditionally depicted in the comics. At the elbows he has an innovation that Hasbro brought to Marvel Legends, which fans showed their disdain for by christening it the Hasbro joint. It combined a hinge and swivel, yet with less range of motion than the classic double-jointed elbows we enjoyed with most Marvel Legends under Toy Biz. Marvel Select had already rendered an Ultimate Wolverine in his first costume from the Ultimate Comics, so perhaps here Hasbro were not wanting to step on that figure's toes, so gave him a later costume. And that costume is rendered with the most incredible inconsistency. On the legs and gloves, the uniform is rendered with a really detailed sculpted surface texture. Then on the torso, that same uniform is completely smooth. It's like the parts were worked on by different people who never met or talked, and then when they first met, they assembled the parts and were like, oh well, people won't notice. And they were almost right, as at that time that inconsistency was totally in the shade of just how bad the head sculpt was. Ugh! It's a face sculpted as wrinkled as a scrotum, and for eyebrows he has 2 hairy caterpillars creeping across his forehead. In 2008, another Marvel Legends Wolverine came along in a 2-pack with Forge. This one returned to main Marvel continuity. I want to like it as it's based on a storyline from 1991 in Uncanny X-Men, which saw the X-Men all don this same uniform. With writing by Chris Claremont and art by Jim Lee, to me it was the X-Men comic at its creative best, just before Marvel turned the X-Men into a cash cow. In spite of my affection for the storyline that spawned the look of this figure, it's hard to like. It oddly keeps the long and lean proportions of the Ultimate Wolverine figure. Further still, it actually reuses the main body of that Ultimate Wolverine with new arms and legs. The proportions of it just aren't Wolverine and would have been better suited to the likes of, say, Gambit. In the plus column he comes with 2 interchangeable heads, one more stoic yet determined, and the other full of straight up berserker rage. In addition to 2 heads, he comes with 2 sets of hands. As you would expect, one set with the claws extended, and perhaps the silver lining of this figure is the second set has claws retracted, something that had been on Marvel Legends collectors' wish list for the longest time. Yet trying to find those silver linings was like trying to find a needle in a bloomin' haystack. As a long-time Marvel Legends fan, the transition from Toy Biz to Hasbro was bumpy at first. Then after those bumps it was straight downhill. In the earliest Hasbro Marvel Legends you could see the groundwork laid by Toy Biz, but as they progressed the engineering changed with the addition of those awful Hasbro joints and the like, plus deco and articulation decreased, and the action figures just no longer had the look and feel of the Marvel Legends of old. And that's even when, for the most part, they were the Marvel Legends of old, as was the case with the Target exclusive Marvel Legends Red Hulk series Wolverine. And if you watched the previous part, don't worry, it's not deja vu. It is in fact Toy Biz's Series 6 brown costume Wolverine redecoed as Tiger Stripe Wolverine. And saying redecoed stretches the term, as not a lot of deco going on here, no shading or highlighting, which compared to previous incarnations just makes him look very flat and well cheap. Except with the way prices were increasing, cheap he wasn't. Economic recession and both the increasing prices of oil and labour costs in China were all cited behind the rising prices of action figures, and I'm sure all of those did play a factor, but to me it began to stink a bit of the big business ideology of giving less but charging more. It seemed Hasbro just failed to understand just what we loved about Marvel Legends, and that was the marriage of the brand with the product. Sure, we all love the brand Marvel, but what got us on board with Marvel Legends was that brand combined with a product, an action figure that stretched the boundaries of just what an action figure could be. Yet Hasbro seemed to think the sole selling point was the brand. They'd already coughed up for that and its inbuilt audience, so the only way they were going to save money was by cannibalizing the product with serial cost-cutting of the action figure. Sure, they could continue to print the words Marvel Legends on an action figure's packaging, but those two words isn't what made an action figure of Marvel Legends in my eyes, and Hasbro probably felt like fans were beginning to desert Marvel Legends, but I would say it was more a case of Marvel Legends deserting the fans. Marvel Legends limped on into 2009, squeezing out one more series. Then, like a bad smell that lingers, the Marvel Legends Ultimate Wolverine would be reused for an X-Men Origins Wolverine Walmart 2-pack Wolverine. It came with a movie beast originally released in the Marvel Legends Annihilus series. You could say the stinkfest that was the X-Men Origins Wolverine movie is deserving of an equally stinkfest of a figure, yet compared to the previous X-Men movie incarnations we looked at in part 2, I'd say this stands among them as my favourite. Sure, it inherits the mismatched, smooth and textured parts from Ultimate Wolverine, but gone is that awful head sculpt replaced by Hugh Jackman's rape face, which I've helped out by repainting it. It's a figure I probably shouldn't like, yet somehow I develop guilty pleasures that I just can't explain, and this is one of them. Maybe it's because that figure stood out as the only 6-inch scale offering from all of X-Men Origins Wolverine. At that time, Marvel Legends was slowly dying and would only cough out a sporadic 2-pack here and there, and with dwindling interest in the 6-inch Legends scale, Hasbro went back to what they know best, 3 3/4-inch figures. In that scale, Marvel characters joined Hasbro's G.I. Joe and Star Wars in the form of the Marvel Universe line. And so it was, that scale became the standard for movie figure lines too, including X-Men Origins Wolverine. I know this scale has its fans, but it's just not my thing. I'd take a bad 6-inch scale figure over the best 3 3/4-inch scale one any day. Back when Return of the Jedi first came out, they were okay for my tiny kid hands to play with, but as an adult collector, it's just not substantial enough to get me excited. Cynically, I can't help but think the switch from 6-inch to 3 3/4-inch scale was a way of Hasbro dramatically slashing production costs and not passing the saving on in full to the consumer. As the saying goes, the cream of the crop will always rise to the top, and in 2012 Marvel Legends returned, met to some fanfare, although met by me to quiet trepidation as I waited to see if Hasbro had learnt the lessons of history, or were they doomed to repeat them. The first Wolverine of Hasbro's second run with Marvel Legends came in the form of the San Diego Comic-Con Uncanny X-Force box set, which also included Psylocke and Archangel, the darker and sleeker vision from the 2007 comic run, where X-Force were a Black Ops branch of the X-Men. Interestingly, still utilizing the Toy Biz era brown costume Wolverine's torso, with limbs that make him much taller. For those not able to attend SDCC and buy the set or afford to splash the cash via eBay to someone who did, the figure later appeared in the Hit Monkey series, but not to completely destroy the exclusivity of the SDCC one. It did receive a variant deco, with the SDCC one's flat grey of the costume becoming silver. Also, it's odd that while they made what translates as the fabric of his costume metallic, they couldn't do that with his claws. A reversal of the SDCC figure, which had flat grey costume yet metallic claws, and of all the Wolverine Wolverine figures, I'd award that one the best claws, not only for the metallic rendering, but also because unlike many a Marvel Legends Wolverine, they don't come all warped, requiring constant straightening. As popular as the X-Force comic was, that costume is still quite a niche one to many, and in the big scheme of things, a fleeting one. So in 2013, as part of the Marvel Legends Puck series, that same figure was released in what I'm sure we'd all agree are more classic colours. A tiger stripe come astonishing X-Men modern Wolverine. The Marvel Legends Puck series Wolverine was not alone as the only Wolverine action figure of 2013, as Hasbro decided to capitalise on the release that year of the second Wolverine movie. But the gap between collector-friendly and kid-friendly figures had become really quite wide. More cost-cutting saw the 3 3/4 inch figures revert to 5 points of articulation, a primitive state not really seen with Marvel figures since the twilight of the previous century. I'd say, well, to save money, Hasbro couldn't shrink the scale anymore, but then last year's Guardians of the Galaxy figures are 2 inches tall. It's like action figures are becoming action figures for your action figures. Which now brings us to the most recent X-Men cinematic offering. It's 2014's X-Men Days of Future Past, the biggest X-Men movie to date, and worldwide it's also the highest grossing. In fact, it also outgrossed both The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Captain America Winter Soldier. Yet, if your knowledge of the wider world is gleaned solely from the action figure aisle at Toys R Us, you'd not even know the movie existed. The only action figures remotely coinciding were the Toys R Us exclusive Marvel Legends X-Men Infinite Series Jubilee Build-A-Figure collection. This included an unmasked Wolverine, head aside, the same as the one from the previous year. Well, that's not quite true. The deco was different, with this newer one receiving the X logos, one on his belt and one on his chest, that fans felt were sorely absent from the previous Puck series one. And focusing on the biggest point of distinction from the previous version, the unmasked head, and the head sculpt isn't too much to my liking. I guess I shouldn't be too down on it, as in the scheme of Marvel Legends era figures, it's middling. Just has a cartoony feeling to it, whereas I prefer the more realistic sculpts of, say, the Apocalypse series Astonishing X-Men Wolverine or the X-Men Classics Ninja Strike Wolverine. But it's certainly not a Hugh Jackman likeness. I do feel like Hasbro have been strong-armed by Disney/Marvel to reduce the visibility of the X-Men movies in their products, which sucks because I would have loved to have seen X-Men Days of Future Past movie Marvel Legends, and in that way these kind of corporate shenanigans being pulled by Marvel hurt fans more than they do Fox. The closest we got to X-Men Days of Future Past figures were these figurines that came mystery packed with a piece of cake in Mexico, and yes, to get them to me here in the UK I coughed up way more than I should have for them on eBay, but such was my hunger, not for the cake but for merchandise from Days of Future Past. So what does the future hold for Wolverine action figures? Well, what with the tricky rights issue between Fox and Disney, the one thing I can be certain of is the future is uncertain. But to end on a poetic note that brings us back full circle to where we began, in 2015 the very first figure we looked at in Wolverine Action Figure Evolution will return. So any fans of the original Secret Wars figures, get ready to be bitten by the bug of nostalgia. Gentle Giant Studios has digitally scanned the original figures, upscaling them to 12 inches, announced today a black costume Spider-Man and Hobgoblin, but from these silhouettes it seems Magneto and yes, Wolverine himself will not be far behind. They are fixing a hefty price tag of $90 to these though. A very steep price for a 12-inch action figure, but perhaps not such a steep price for the opportunity to recapture my childhood. Anyway, this Wolverine Action Figure Evolution has been my biggest undertaking to date, so I would love it if you could reward this video by giving it a big thumbs up. Also, pipe up in the comments below and voice an opinion. Get ready for Avengers 2 Age of Ultron by clicking the video on the right and checking out my Ultron Action Figure Evolution. Hope to see you next time.